poked a hole in the radiator when I was installing it on the mounting screw. Throw that piece of crap away. Alright, welcome back you guys. I have a new battery in place. If you watched the last video, you realized my first drive didn't go so well. I sucked a bunch of sludge from the old fuel tank through the fuel system and everything went wrong from there. But I did replace the starter, and in so doing, I fouled up the electrical system somehow and had really weak cranks. You're not going to believe the kind of shenanigans that happened afterwards. But to troubleshoot, I replaced the battery with a much bigger, newer battery, and it didn't work. Still would not crank. I replaced the starter, the new gear reduction starter, still would not crank. And it turns out, as you can see here, I just ran a jumper cable from the ground up to the bell housing, and now it cranks. So obviously when I dropped a wrench on the back of the alternator, I fried a ground wire someplace. So I'm gonna have to track exactly which one down, but I'll just go through and replace all the grounds to make sure it works. But that being finished, I still had a problem with a rough engine, rough idle. Let me show you a little bit of what happened here. All right, so up front here, everything was looking good. I felt good about the head rebuild. Go back and watch the video on that. It was all brand new to me, this whole ordeal. I'm a complete noob at, but got everything buttoned up. I was ready to run, and it's just running really rough, even when I did get it started. And then it dawned on me that I had failed to plug these ports on each of the emissions. So I went ahead and just replaced it with the existing emissions hosing, piping, plumbing, and just capped it off here. And now it feels like it's sealed up pretty well. I actually had to make myself a little special tool. I bent a wrench. Anyway, I got that going. I felt pretty good. And then, wouldn't you know, while I'm in here trying to figure out the compression, I checked the timing. The timing was on. When I had the engine opened, I went ahead and I cranked the crank. I had recently replaced the crank gear, so I torqued that to spec. I had everything else all buttoned up, and I went to start it after I replaced these plugs here, and it would fire and quit, and the timing would be off by 2 or 3 teeth. So I'd replace the timing belt, put it back on, crank it off by 2 or 3 teeth. I knew something was not going on. I didn't want to do anything else because just rebuilt the head, and super frustrated, really scared that I just undid all my work. So I went ahead and pulled the crank gear off, and what should I find but, look at that, it's cracked. And by God, I should have known better. A nice lightweight plastic. I thought it'd be cool to have a nice lightweight plastic crank gear. That was a stupid decision. I should have known better. Look at that. So every time it would fire up, it would open up, it would slip off, and then it would die, and it would just rotate about a half crank here. And then I would reset it. Without knowing it, I would pull the timing belt off. I would twist the crank gear until it timing right on the top dead center. Do it again, it would slip off again. So, throw that piece of crap away. I got myself a nice machined metal crank gear. It's on there. I've got everything else buttoned up. I'm gonna drop the radiator back in. We're gonna fire it up. It's gonna run. I'm actually gonna drive this car. Fingers crossed everything actually goes together this time. And I hope you guys can watch it with me here. Anyway, let's get it back together. Let's get it on the road. job for another day, and right now I just want to see the garage. There we go. Got it in here pretty tight. Feels pretty good. It's not slogging down yet. Oh, feels really nice. I'm a little nervous. Had a pretty steep hill in the neighborhood. Shift from first to second is good. This is a really bad creak in the steering wheel. Standing here, it's getting hot. Probably because I didn't burp it. I didn't bleed the air coming off out of the. All right, it's in the red, so I'm gonna turn around. All right, back in the garage, but. One more thing before we go. I can't do one episode without screwing something up. But I don't know if you can see, but I managed to poke a nice little. There's a hole in the radiator. Let's just put it that way. It's in there somewhere. Yep, I poked a hole in the radiator when I was installing it on the mounting screw, and so that's a little bit of a bummer. Dripping now, and. But not too broken up over it, just because I knew it was the original radiator or an old radiator, and it's gonna need to be replaced anyway. So add that to the next thing I gotta do before we really get this thing out on the road. So we'll end it on that. Another 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but at least we're driving now and I feel a lot better. All right, it's been about a week now and I have a new radiator. Finally showed up, but before I get the fan put back on and the new switch installed in the car, I just wanted to quickly review some of the comedy of errors that has happened to me since I've been building this car. And if you've watched some of the videos, you know I did have to rebuild the head, and bent valve, it's questionable where that was resulted from. But since then, my first drive went terribly wrong. I sucked up some sludge from the old fuel tank, which I should have known better. I should have replaced it off the bat. And in the process of replacing the fuel filter, I dropped my ratchet behind the alternator and about caught the engine on fire, resulting in a no start situation, which I could not figure out. So I replaced the battery, didn't fix it. I replaced the starter, also didn't fix it. I'm not too tore up about that because the starter had been giving me problems in even previous episodes. Go check that out. No battery, no starter. I finally figured out it's just the ground wire. Obviously I melted at some point, which I actually haven't quite figured out which one, but I'm gonna go through and replace all the grounds. A temporary setup now, I just run the jumper cable up to the starter for the ground wire and it works fine. In so doing, I pulled off the timing belt just to check the situation up front, and I ended up cracking the plastic crank gear, which was dumb of me to begin with to actually install a plastic crank gear. Should have known better. Getting that squared away, put the old radiator back in. Of course, I pop a hole in it. So time after time, I keep screwing things up. Fingers crossed, this radiator goes in. I can finally get this thing running and go for a proper drive. So fingers crossed. Again, I don't screw something up, but I think it'll be okay. And so far, I'm not too disappointed in myself with some of these mistakes, because a lot of it has to do with just old parts to begin with, and it's just kind of the nature of working on cars. And I'm not a professional, but I enjoy it and I'm having a good time, and it's going to be a nice car when it's done. So let's get this car on the road. I think it's time. Okay, the radiator is all on and buttoned up. I'm gonna top off the radiator fluid after I run it here real quick, but I'm gonna show you guys a little trick I'm gonna try. If you have a T without a bleeder screw, what I'm gonna do, I drilled a little bleeder hole here on the radiator hose, and you're just gonna pull it a little bit loose, So we're gonna let it get hot till coolant starts to blow out of that hole, and then we'll slip it on, and then the strap will cover it up, and we'll tighten that down, and we'll be all done. And then we're gonna go for a drive. Let's find out what happens. See, it's starting to come out a little bit here. That's it. All right, I'm gonna shut it off for a minute. That's pretty good. That's what I was looking for. Try not to get burnt. I'll go ahead and tighten this up, clean up a little bit, add a little more, and we'll go drive. Okay, I think everything's buttoned up and we're ready for the real first drive this time. A little nervous. Just a reminder, I haven't had a chance to change the clutch, touch the drivetrain, anything like that. So suspension is still 25 years old, so let's see how it goes. Clutch is super stiff. Haven't had a chance to put a timing light on it yet, so I know the timing's off, but I dialed it in with the power of my ear. Feels pretty good. It's rough idle. I still quite haven't had a chance to mess with the carburetor at all, and I feel like it could use a little adjusting, but I don't know anything about that black magic. Clutch pedal's super stiff. I assume the clutch cable is probably seized slightly. The street out of my neighborhood is downhill, so I think that's probably a good place to start, to go downhill. Brakes feel good. All right, you guys ready? I'm a little nervous. There's no cars coming. All right, here we go. We're gonna drive. First gear. Second gear. Third gear. Fourth gear. The gears work. Fifth gear works. 40 miles an hour. 45 miles an hour. Woo! Okay. I haven't crashed. The wheels haven't fallen off. I'm driving my Fiat. Now shifting. Yes. Yes. It's not good. I did a thing. Yes. All right, now we're cruising. Oh dear. Baby deer. Man, wouldn't that suck? Wouldn't that be awful? My first drive. I hit a deer. Not bad. Holy crap, not bad at all. Alright, so I'm going to take it up a windy hill, back down a windy hill. Let's see if I can keep it on the road. Watch out, watch out. Watch the man. Tell you what, nothing like a first drive to get into an accident. It's like a magnet for accidents. Almost hit a deer. Almost hit a car. Alright. See how she does up this little windy road here. you guys. First drive is going much better than I expected. I went a lot farther than I planned to. I just started cruising and I went with it. I'm super happy. Drives real great. Couple things I need your help with. I can't quite figure out the carburetor situation, why it idles so terribly. It drives great. Going downhill with a little back pressure, there's a little bit of sputtering when it's hot, and when it's idle, it's really rough and it wants to stall. So I don't know what that is in the carburetor. I haven't even taken the carburetor off the car. I know it needs to be rebuilt. Probably just going to replace it with something better. I did adjust the choke. The water choke seems to be working correctly. It starts pretty well. That works and operates. But the idle situation, what's the best way to adjust the idle on this carburetor in this car? Let me know about that. Also, the clutch cable is super stiff. So I don't know if that's a problem with the cable. Should I just replace the cable? Was that easy to do? Or is there going to be something else I need to worry about inside the clutch as far as the release bearing or the release mechanism that's causing it to be really stiff? Otherwise, it shifts great. It holds gear. I'm not popping out of any gear. It's holding its own. It's very smooth. It's loud. It drives straight. There's no wobbles or any pulling or anything unexpected. A little bit of play in the steering wheel, but otherwise, I'm just super happy. It didn't bog down. It didn't slow down. It didn't hiccup. It just went straight up the hill, and I couldn't be more happy. I mean, I am just so thrilled. I was able to get this car on the road, and I'm driving it for the first time. And it's actually a car that can run and drive. I am tickled pink. All right, well, I'm gonna keep driving. Thanks guys for joining me. I'm gonna do some more work on this car coming up. I hope you join me. Check out what I got in store, and don't be afraid to look at some of the other cars I'm working on too, like my Sonnet. I've got a neat old Mercedes-Benz W108 series 280 SC 4.5 that I'm pulling out of a garage for the first time in like 10 years. And I know it ran because I put it in that garage, believe it or not. And so I hope to get that running very soon. So keep an eye out for things happening on this channel. I appreciate you joining me. See you on the next one.